I need some more of your energy in my life.
No, I don't think it's energy. Hey everybody, it's Pastor Los here with you for another edition of Gospel Unplugged, this time with my stellar colleague,
Pastor Olson, Popp.
And we are here to talk about the story we're going to hear on Palm Sunday. And Palm Sunday, the Palm Sunday story is in all four of the Gospels. And in some ways it's very, very similar, and yet there's always these interesting, distinct details. So this is the story as recorded in St. John's Gospel. It begins with the 12th verse of the 12th chapter. St. John wrote, "The next day the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, 'Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel.' Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, 'Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt.' His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. It was also because they heard that he had performed this sign that the crowd went to meet him. The Pharisees then said to one another, 'You see, you can do nothing. Look, the whole world has gone after him.'" Here ends the reading. Mm-hmm. What got you thinking? What grabbed your attention?
I think what struck me this time around with this story was that Jesus doesn't really do anything in it. It's not about Jesus. It's about how everyone is responding to Jesus. I think we have this image of Jesus on the donkey riding in and people like this crowds around him with palms. But as I read this, Jesus isn't really a main character in this. It's the crowds that are the main characters. It's the Pharisees that have things to say about what is happening. All Jesus does is get on a donkey. And that's really interesting to me, is what is it about Jesus that these crowds are being so drawn into? Like, this is Jesus's viral moment. It is Beatlemania, like in John's Gospel. They are just going crazy after him because of all of these things they've seen him done, they've heard him done. He just raised Lazarus from the dead. And they're drawn to him because of this and because of this life and this healing. They're calling him the King of Israel. And then on the other side are the Pharisees, who are like, "Oh my gosh, this has gone totally out of control. Why didn't we do something earlier, right, about this guy?" And so that's what's striking to me this time around, is that this is more about our response to Jesus and what draws us to Jesus than about what Jesus is actually doing on this day in this moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because it made me realize the other three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus has planned this moment.
Right.
And he sends the disciples ahead and tells them where to find the donkey or the colt, what to say when someone asks why they're getting it, to bring it back. A much more active or even orchestrated moment of a triumphal entry, where here it almost feels, as you're talking about it, it almost feels like just the necessary transition John has to make. Like it's not that big of a deal, except for it magnifies what is happening and how people are responding to him.
Right.
And in some ways, I think it's interesting, too, because it references back the story of Lazarus one chapter earlier, not that much longer in the narrative framework, that the people who saw him raise Lazarus continue to testify.
Yep.
Like they've been out telling everyone, creating the buzz. Yeah. And other people so now have heard about this guy who raised him from the dead, so they come as well, which is kind of the way the miracles in John, which John never calls a miracle, calls them signs, are designed to work. So there's a sense in which, like, oh, it's working. Like he really is the performer, not just of, change the course of nature miracles. He is the one who creates signs for people to see God at work in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think I love that last. I mean, there are I think of Luke as the best writer in a sense, or storyteller with some of the great parables that he shares. But John has his moments, and this is one of them in terms of that line of the Pharisees. You see, you can do nothing.
Yeah.
Like this helplessness. He is right. He is Beatlemania. He's bigger than we can contain.
Yeah.
And then that line, look, the world has gone after him, which I think echoes back to the story with Nicodemus, where he says, compares what's happening in his life to Moses and the serpents and the Old Testament story of, oh my word, I didn't mean to get into this much of a detour, but the line that Jesus uses, and when I am raised up, I will draw all people unto myself. And that now is happening. Like he is just about to be raised up. And as that happens, even his opponents say, look, the world has gone after him. So what gets you thinking, like, do you have a preaching angle yet, or sort of a heart of the...
Absolutely not. But the big thing...
By the way, I love that about
you. The big thing of Palm Sunday is a big thing throughout all the Gospels is Jesus's kingship and reign and what that means. The donkey is part of that, the fulfillment of the Hebrew scriptures, all that stuff. And they think they're calling him the King of Israel. And they think they know that this is what the king looks like, and yet they don't yet know what it will look like to be the king. Yeah. And so that's always the Palm Sunday kind of thing is we think we know who Jesus is. That's why we're all coming around. That's why we're crazy about him is he's done all this stuff, but we don't yet know. Like he still hasn't shown us everything yet. And so there's that anticipation, and will the crowds follow him to that?
Yeah, and even his disciples don't know. I think that's kind of a nice moment of honesty. His disciples did not understand these things at first. But when Jesus was glorified, and I think when we see that word glory, we think, oh, on Easter, after Easter. For John, glory is cross and Easter and ascension. But it's that whole thing together. So it is when he is crucified that the disciples are like, oh, okay, this is a very different Messiah than we had ever imagined. And I think, again, in John, the next scene after this is some Jews want to see Jesus, and it's almost like John, at different points during his gospel, has been saying from chapter 2 on at the wedding of Cana, it's not yet my hour, it's not yet my hour, it's not my hour. This happens, the Greeks ask to see him, and it's like, it's now's game on. Yeah, it is the hour. And there's a way in which that's the function of Palm Sunday also. It draws us into the main event, the main story, like fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be quite a week. And so there's something of an invitation in the story of this day to then come along for the most life-changing ride you can imagine. Yeah. So we often will give folks a question or two to get them thinking.
I love how you always say we often when we do it
every single week. Okay, per usual.
Per usual.
So, that's true, I do that. All right, so what are your prepared questions this week, Pastor Olson Popp?
Well, thinking about all of the people who are being drawn to Jesus in this story, what about Jesus draws you to him? What is it about Jesus that you know and have experienced that wants you to be close to him and leads you to shout Hosanna and wave your palms? And then another one, just how do you understand and experience Jesus as a king? What does that look like to you? How do you understand that? And then throughout the week, what does that look like? Throughout Holy Week, what does that look like? How does that change? What does it mean that Jesus is King? Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll see you at church a lot.
Yes.